So let's look at our objectives for today. We would like you to be able to describe the structure and function of reproductive systems in humans, describe the menstrual cycle, explain functions of various structures involving the developing fetus, and finally compare different birth control methods. So this is the kind of diagram that you most likely would see in some of your multiple choice questions. And because we went through what happens in the ovaries separate from what happens in the uterus, it should make more sense to you now. So if we look at the timeline here, so we have number of days. So let me use black. So this timeline here goes throughout the entire diagram. So we have day 0, we have day 14, which we know is the day for ovulation, and day 28 would be the end of the cycle to start back at day 1. So in the ovary, we have the follicle starts to develop from day 1, and at day 14, we have the shedding of the egg or the mature ovum into the fallopian tube. From day 14 to the end of the cycle, we have the development of the corpus luteum. The maturing follicle is responsible for the secretion of the hormone estrogen. So as the follicle gets bigger and bigger, we have, of course, more estrogen being released. This estrogen is responsible for the buildup of the lining in the uterus. So if you look at so here we have the lining thickness. It is being shed here, so the lining thickness is smaller, but as more and more estrogen is produced, you realize that the lining gets thicker and thicker, progressing past day 14. So we also have from the pituitary gland follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to stimulate the follicles to develop. So that happens early in the cycle, follicle stimulating hormone. And then we have luteinizing hormone in the red. Luteinizing hormone is responsible solely for ovulation, so that encourages the Graafian follicle to burst and the ovum is released. So we have this massive surge in LH here, and both of these follicle stimulating hormones drastically reduces after ovulation. And then of course we have progesterone, which is released from the corpus luteum. So I want to bring your attention here most to what is happening inside of the uterus. So we have shedding of the lining here, then we have the lining starts to build up. The lining continues being built up and continues to be maintained. So both progesterone and estrogen are going to maintain the lining until, or if no fertilization takes place, then the lining is going to be at its thickest around day 28, and then it is going to be shed. So we'll start back at this position here. So the only other thing I need to mention in this diagram is this one here, which I've included, which shows your temperature. So your temperature for women remains fairly constant throughout the first 14 days. But from the time ovulation takes place, there is a massive spike in your temperature. And by massive, I mean just by a few degrees, right? So your temperature goes up and it stays high for a prolonged period until menstruation starts again. So this is important for persons who are practicing natural methods of birth control, because the spike in temperature will let you know that ovulation has taken place. Or even for persons who are trying to get pregnant, they will know that ovulation has taken place because the temperature of their internal body temperatures have gone up by a couple degrees or a few points on the degree scale. Right? So, but we are going to talk about that a little later on in the lesson. So this is the menstrual cycle. It is hormone driven. We talked about follicle stimulating hormone, which is the hormone that encourages the follicles to develop. Then we have luteinizing hormone, which is solely responsible for ovulation. Then we talked about estrogen. Estrogen is released in the ovaries by the developing follicle, and it targets your endometrium. It causes the endometrium lining to thicken. And then we have progesterone, also produced in the ovary by the corpus luteum, and that progesterone maintains the lining. So if your progesterone levels fall, then the lining is no longer going to be maintained, and that lining, you're going to have a period, you're going to have shedding of that, all the tissues and stuff inside of the uterus. So it begs to explain, if a woman is pregnant, then her progesterone levels are supposed to be relatively high to maintain that environment for the developing fetus. So let us talk about fertilization and beyond. What happens if an egg meets the sperm? Now, the only way for an egg and a sperm to meet is if you have some kind of mechanism that brings them together. Now, because the reproductive system, I told you, is different from male and female, we have the male gametes, which is your sperm, also known as, or the correct name for sperm is spermatoza, right? That sperm is a gamete, and we know that gametes are haploid. They have half the number of chromosomes, and the female gamete we know is called an ova or an egg. It is also haploid. So we have a haploid sperm and a haploid egg, and the only way for fertilization to take place is for them to meet. So how do they meet? We have to have sexual intercourse that is going to, where sperms are going to be released high up into the vagina, and that is going to bring that sperm and that egg closer together. The sperms will have to swim through the uterus and into the fallopian tubes, where they will meet the egg just after ovulation. So after we have sexual intercourse, and if the timing is right, meaning that you have intercourse in or around ovulation, then we would have fusion of the gametes. We are going to have this haploid sperm and this haploid egg are going to meet in the fallopian tubes. And when these two that contain their haploid amount of chromosomes, so we know that in humans we have 23 chromosomes in the sperm and 23 in the egg. Because it's haploid, it has half the amount. When they fuse, we now would have 23 pairs. Right? So you have your full complement. The zygote is now diploid, and this is the beginning of a new individual or an organism, a human, and this is where it starts. So in the fallopian tube, we have fertilization taking place. So fertilization is the fusion of the haploid sperm with the haploid ova to create a zygote, right? With the full amount of chromosomes. So for humans, that has to be 23 pairs. After fusion of the gametes, or after fertilization, that zygote, which started in the fallopian tube, will continue on its journey. Remember, it was on its way to the uterus. So it's going to continue on its journey to the uterus. But while that is happening, remember, the zygote has one nucleus. That nucleus is going to start to divide. So in this diagram here, you are going to see a mass of cells. So one cell will divide by mitosis, and you should know that mitosis maintains the number of chromosomes. So that one zygote with the one nucleus starts to divide several times by mitosis. So you end up with 2, then 4 cells, then 8 cells, then 16, and it continues that way until you have this ball of cells called a morula approximately around day 4 after fertilization. So that morula, or the zygote you can call it, continues on its journey into the uterus. Now remember, this would have happened after day 14 or in and around day 14. So 14 plus 4 is 18. So we're looking at around day 18 to day 20, somewhere around there, we have that mass of cells is going to reach the uterus and into this nice cushy area here, filled with blood vessels and filled with tissues, and it's going to embed itself into that tissue or lining in the uterus that was being prepared for this very situation here. So we call that implantation, where the mass of cells or the zygote, or if you want to be even more accurate, the morula, embeds itself into the uterus lining. Right? Otherwise known as the endometrium. So once implantation has taken place, you would have now a whole lot of activities going to start taking place. You're going to have the development of the placenta and the amniotic fluid, and then we have the fetus will start to develop. So at this stage, we don't have a fetus, we just have a mass of cells that are going to start to specialize, differentiate into what we will eventually know as a developing fetus. So we have the final stage is month by month, we have different changes happening. So we have development of the placenta, amniotic umbilical cord, and then cells that were just this mass of a ball of cells with no differentiation. It starts to differentiate. So we have head, we have arms, we have the heart being developed, the brain being developed. So month to month, we have different changes happening until around month 9, where we have a fully developed fetus or a baby, and that baby will have to be born. Okay, so let us take a few minutes to talk about the placenta specifically. Now, the placenta is a temporary organ that is created inside of the mother's body to assist with the development of the fetus. It is the only organ that is ever produced after, well, when a person is a full adult. So it's a temporary organ, and it has the mother side and it has the fetal side or the chorionic side. So I want you to look carefully at this diagram. Remember, the uterine walls would have these invaginations to prepare it for the implantation process. So here you have the uterine wall. This is the uterus here, so this light pink region here with your blood vessels and all the tissues. So this is your tissues here. And notice how it forms these finger-like projections here, right? So this is from here to here, that is the uterine wall with the finger-like projections. On the other side, we have from this region here that I have highlighted, it is the fetal side or the chorionic side. This is the side with the baby. So this is the side that has its own blood vessels here and also its own finger-like projections. If you notice, I'm trying to highlight them here. So we have these finger-like projections that project into the uterine wall. And then you have, so I would use another color. So you have this space here between the mother's side and the baby's side. So this is a space where the both of them never meet. So you don't have mixing at all of the mother's blood with the baby's blood, right? This entire region here is called the placenta. That area where the fetus develops projections into the mother's uterine wall. But you have a space that prevents mixing of the baby's blood with the mother's blood. So how does the mother get nutrients to the baby, and how does the baby get rid of its waste, right? So we have to have diffusion taking place between that space from the mother's blood system to the baby's blood system. But remember that there is never any mixing of the two blood groups of blood types between the mother and the baby. Okay, so let us look at the functions of the placenta. Now, obviously, this diagram has been stretched out because we know that in the uterus, this umbilical cord here will be coiled. So here we have the placenta. Here is the mother side, the uterine side. And of course, on this side, you have the chorionic side. So that is the baby side. So we have the invaginations here. And we have the mother's blood vessels and the baby's blood vessels. All right? So what are the functions of the placenta? Of course, the placenta provides nutrients for the baby from the mother. So all the glucose, all the amino acids, vitamins, and minerals that she would have taken from her diet is going to cross the placenta and go and diffuse from the blood into the baby's bloodstream. We have excretion. So we have any waste that the baby would have produced, because it is a living organism. It is going to go through excretion and produce waste, and that is going to go in the opposite direction from baby to mother, and then the mother will excrete. We have a protective function, so that the placenta sort of have a protective barrier and keeps the baby's blood from mixing with the mother's blood, and it also prevents some substances from passing directly across to the baby, right? So that will depend on the size and the mass of that substance. So we know that small things like HIV virus can pass through the placenta. Alcohol and other small substances can pass through and go across to the baby, but other larger substances cannot pass the placenta. So it has a protective function. Immunity. Any antibodies that the mother has that she would have built up throughout her lifetime, those are going to temporarily provide immunity to the baby until it is born. So it has an immunity function. And secretion of hormones. This is quite important. Remember, we spoke about the corpus luteum producing progesterone, and that progesterone maintains the lining of the womb. Now, that happens up until the placenta is formed. Once the placenta is fully established, this placenta secretes progesterone as well. So the progesterone is going to help or assist with maintaining the lining of the uterus and prevents premature abortion or early birth. Okay? All right, so let's now look at the umbilical cord. We know that the umbilical cord is this tube that stretches from the placenta to the baby. And it more or less mirrors the functions of the placenta, only that it is a transport medium. So it has a respiratory function, so all the oxygen that the baby needs for respiration will travel through these mass of blood vessels here to the baby, and carbon dioxide that is produced from the respiring cells of the fetus are going to go in the opposite direction to the placenta, and the mother is going to exhale that carbon dioxide. It is the medium of transfer of nutrients and, of course, oxygen between mother to child. And on the flip side, it is the medium of transport for metabolic waste produced by the developing fetus to the placenta, and then out through the mother will get rid of that metabolic waste. Finally, we want to look at the amnion. Now, in reality, remember I said that this umbilical cord will be coiled, so the baby will not be this distance from the placenta. So what we have forming is this sac around the umbilical cord, and it surrounds the developing fetus. So that is called the amnion. Right? That is the amnion. That amnion secretes a fluid called the amniotic fluid. Right? So I shouldn't point at the baby really. The amniotic fluid is that liquid inside here that has many functions. The first function of the amniotic fluid is mechanical shock. It prevents that baby from bouncing around. It prevents, like you said, it's a shock absorber. So it keeps the baby in a sort of stable, comfortable environment within reason until birth. It has a lubricating function. It keeps the fetus from drying out while still inside the mother's belly or the mother's uterus. And finally, it provides a nice stable temperature for effective development of that fetus. So the amnion or the amniotic sac is that sac that surrounds the baby, and the amniotic fluid is that liquid that surrounds and cushions the baby throughout the duration of the pregnancy. Now, I just wanted to come back to this for a quick second to inform you that for pregnancy to take place, the timing must be correct. So the sperm must be released into the vagina at the time when ovulation takes place. Now the sperms can live for a few days, but that mature ovary is only viable for about 2 to 3 days. So it's a very narrow window. If fertilization takes place, then we have continued development or continued maintenance of the lining, and this corpus luteum will persist until the placenta is fully developed and active to start producing its own progesterone. Now, what happens if a couple wants to engage in sexual intercourse but does not want to get pregnant? Then they are going to have to engage in different birth control methods. And we tend to see the words birth control and contraception being used interchangeably. However, birth control is really all the methods that you would use when you're engaging in family planning. So that is about controlling the frequency of children that you have or the number of children that you intend to have. So birth control is all the methods that you would use. Contraception technically is the non-natural methods that you use while you're engaging in family planning. So your non-natural methods are your contraceptive methods, and birth control is all your non-natural and your natural methods of birth control. So here are a myriad different types of birth control, or rather contraceptive methods, and if we were in an actual classroom, the students would have been able to interface with some of these. However, we are not, so let us go through different methods of birth control. So the first one we want to look at is natural methods of birth control. So these natural methods are meant to prevent fertilization, prevent that egg, or prevent that sperm rather, from meeting the egg. Now, one natural method of birth control is abstinence, and it is 100% safe and 100% effective. If you're not engaging in sexual intercourse, there is no way that a sperm can meet the egg and engage or result in a pregnancy. So that is one foolproof method of preventing pregnancies. Then there are other methods for couples who are engaging in sexual intercourse but they don't want to have children. Then you can use what is called the rhythm method, where you look at your body's temperature. Remember, we spoke about the increase in temperature during ovulation. So you'll be checking your temperature regularly, and then you're looking at the mucus secretion, the thickness and the color of the secretion that comes out of the vagina. And you'll also be looking at your calendar. So if you know the length of your cycle, it may be 28 days, it may be 32 days, then you can, along with looking at the temperature and the secretion levels and thickness, you can have a very good idea of when you're ovulating, and then you would just avoid having intercourse during those times. Now, these methods tend to be around 80 to 90% effective, 80 to 90% effective once used correctly. And we have, of course, the withdrawal method, or what is properly known as coitus interruptus. That method is where you're engaging in sexual intercourse and the male would withdraw or pull out of the vagina just before he ejaculates. So that's called the withdrawal method. And you would use that method along with the rhythm method to help you prevent a pregnancy. Another natural method is called lactation amenorrhea. That is where a breastfeeding mother would continuously breastfeed a child, and by breastfeeding it prevents ovulation. So that's where the amenorrhea comes in. But it has to be a consistent process, right? So a breastfeeding mother can continue breastfeeding, and that delays ovulation and therefore prevent a pregnancy. If you're not ovulating, then there is no egg, and therefore the sperms cannot fertilize an egg and you cannot get pregnant. But of course, you have to be a breastfeeding mother, right? So that may not work for everyone if you don't already have a child and is breastfeeding that child. So these natural methods are quite effective against preventing pregnancy once used properly. Okay, another category of contraception would be methods that prevent implantation. In other words, the sperm and egg may be allowed to meet, but they will not be able, that fetus or the zygote rather, will not be able to be embedded or implanted in the uterus, and it will just fall out of the vagina like a regular period. And one method that is used is the IUDs. These are inserted into the vagina high enough so that any developing zygote that is coming down will not find a secure place to embed, and it will just fall out of the uterus. Now, this is about 97% effective. It is quite an effective method of preventing pregnancy. However, it can be controversial in that it may seem as if a person is having an abortion, in that fertilization was allowed to occur. So that some persons may see this as an abortionary method because life started. You had fusion of gametes and you have a zygote forming, and therefore it may appear as an abortion. Persons who use IUDs obviously don't see it like that, because for some persons, life does not begin until the zygote is embedded and it starts to develop, and it starts to have, you have separation of the cells, so you have heart being formed, brain being formed. Until that happens, all you have is just one mass of cells with one nucleus or a few nuclei, and therefore it cannot be considered a life, a full form life. So there is some toing and froing, and for you young ladies, you need to determine what is best for you. There's no right or wrong answer here. Okay, so other methods of contraception involve methods to prevent ovulation. Again, if you do not produce a mature ovum, then even if there are sperms around, you cannot get pregnant. So most of these methods that prevent ovulation are chemical in nature, right? And most of the time, the chemicals used are estrogen and progesterone. So hormones, whether natural or synthetic, are introduced into the body, whether via a pill that you will take every single day, an implant that you have to go to the doctor and they're going to insert this implant that will secrete the hormones gradually into your system, or a patch that you wear, like a smoker's patch, which will also secrete the hormones into your body. Now, estrogen delays or prevents the secretion of FSH. And again, if that follicle stimulating hormone is kept on the down low, then it means that the follicle will not develop and a mature ovum will not develop. So that is how the contraceptive pills and implants and patches work. It's a hormone that is introduced, a naturally producing hormone, because your body naturally produces these two hormones, but the levels are increased to the point where it prevents the follicles from being stimulated. So no mature ovum and therefore no ovulation. If no ovulation, then you cannot become pregnant. So once these are used, properly, it's about 95 to 100% effective. But of course, you need to either remember to take these pills every single day, or remember to keep your appointments with your doctors to get your implants removed and or replaced. Okay? And another method, of course, again, is to prevent fertilization. How can these be done? By wearing condoms. I think we all know about them. They are male and female condoms. And then you have barrier methods. Methods that prevent physically the sperm from even entering into the uterus, so it cannot get to the fallopian tube. So you have the diaphragms, which are put right up against the cervix, and it prevents the sperms from getting entry into the uterus. These can and are most of the time used along with spermicides, which are creams, and there are very many different kinds, which prevent, or the spermicides which kill the sperms. They provide an environment where the sperms cannot survive. So these are used together. And of course, you do have IUDs, the same IUDs I mentioned before, but these IUDs would prevent the sperm. It provides a sort of barrier, so the sperms cannot smoothly get up the uterus and into the fallopian tube. So it creates like a kind of obstacle course for these sperms. So if these sperms cannot get past, then they die, and then there's no fertilization. Now, I just want to mention that condoms, of all the birth control methods that I mentioned, condoms are the only ones which prevent STDs. All the others will prevent pregnancies, but condoms, besides preventing pregnancies, also have a role in preventing the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. So it has the added benefit of that. Now, some persons are allergic to the condoms, and some persons may find it difficult to get the condom on in time and may have to use some kind of backup method if this fails. And of course, we know that condoms can burst and they have the other issues as well. So as a female and a male, together you need to decide which method you're going to use. Now I want to talk about a method I did not have here, which is a permanent method of birth control, where you would either have a tubal ligation for the females, so this is the female procedure, or a vasectomy, which is the male procedure, where the vas deferens for the males are cut, and that prevents the sperms from being able to leave the body, or the fallopian tubes are cut and tied, and that prevents the egg from entering into the fallopian tubes. These are permanent methods of birth control. So these are permanent, and you would only resort to these methods of birth control if you are absolutely sure that you don't want any more children or any more pregnancies, because it involves a surgery, one, and two, it is very difficult to reverse the decision. Once those tubes have been tied off or ligated, or the vasectomy has taken place, it is extremely difficult for a doctor to go back in and reconnect those tubes. So a person who is using these methods have to be absolutely certain that this is what they want. They want no more children, and therefore these are 100% effective, obviously, because if there's no egg coming down, there's no fertilization, and if sperms can't get out, the person will still have a fluid coming out of the penis during ejaculation, and that would be mostly the seminal fluids from the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, the corpus gland. So they will have a fluid, but that fluid will have no sperms in it whatsoever, right? So once again, all the other methods are temporary. So once you use these other methods and you want to start a family, you just stop using the method. The tubal ligation and the vasectomy are permanent. You cannot change your mind after the fact, but it is 100% effective. And as we talked about STDs, I just want to end on the note of the fact that when you're engaging in sexual intercourse, you need to be aware that there are dangers, for want of a better word, associated with it. So, of course, we know the acronym of A, B, C. So you abstain, and that is 100% safe. You cannot get an STD if you are abstaining from any sexual practices. B, be faithful. So if the two partners maintain their faithfulness, then you cannot spread the disease. And C, of course, ABC, condomize if you are concerned about exposure to an STD. And we just want to talk about two STDs really, really quickly, because you would have covered this topic under the lesson of diseases. So we're just going to mention these really, really quickly and compare the two of them. So gonorrhea and HIV. Gonorrhea is caused by a bacteria. However, HIV is caused by a virus. That is why it is called HIV. So the V is for virus, human immunodeficiency virus. So the root cause or the causative agent of both of these are different. Gonorrhea's symptoms include pain when urinating for both male and female, and a discharge that will be quite smelly, discolored for both male and females. However, for HIV, the symptoms can include a flu-like symptom with swollen lymph nodes. You may have a fever, and that is the initial infection. You may have thrush forming on the tongue. However, HIV can lead to the development of AIDS. So I want to make it clear. A person can have HIV, which is the virus inside their system, but they cannot have AIDS. They don't have to have AIDS. AIDS comes on when the HIV or the viral load is so high that it causes them to become, the system is compromised. So they end up with these diseases that come along with having AIDS. So things like cancer, etc., comes when you have AIDS. So you can have HIV but not have AIDS. So they are two different things, but HIV causes the development of AIDS. Gonorrhea, because it's a bacterial agent, causative agent, has a cure. And what do we use? Once it's caught early enough, they use antibiotics to treat persons with gonorrhea. However, most viral diseases that we know of do not have a cure. So once it's a virus, there is no cure. There are only a handful of them. So HIV, chickenpox, corona, there is no cure once it's a viral disease. So you would want to be very careful as you engage in sexual intercourse to make sure that you use the correct method of birth control and also the correct method to prevent yourself from contracting any of these diseases. However, these days we do have antiretroviral drugs which help you to control or manage the symptoms of HIV. So you it's not a death sentence that it used to be a long time ago. So that brings us to the end of a very long lesson on reproduction in animals, or rather in humans. I do thank you for staying. I would like you to join us again for other lessons by the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy's e-learning program. My next lesson will be on reproduction in plants. I hope to see you there. Thank you and stay safe.